The Justice Department may sue colleges over the use of affirmative action in admissions. Madison Medeiros writes, the Department of Justice has been busy in its vendetta against gang activity and illegal immigration in the United States since Donald Trump took office just over 6 months ago. But now the president would like to allocate resources to diving into what he believes are discriminatory practices in college admissions departments throughout the country. The reason? The Trump administration feels that colleges may be using affirmative action policies to, quote, discriminate against white applicants, according to the New York Times. It is important to note, however, that the document obtained by the Times on Monday does not specifically mention white applicants. The Times reports that an internal document circulated throughout the DOJ asking if any lawyers wanted to work on investigations and possible litigation related to intentional race-based discrimination in college and university admissions. Though university-related matters are typically run through the educational opportunity section, the Times writes that this particular division will be handled by the Civil Rights Division, which is comprised of Trump's political appointees. Currently, universities use affirmative action policies to ensure that minority applicants have opportunities to receive a higher education. Since President John F. Kennedy declared the Council on Equal Opportunity through an executive order in 1961 to promote educational employment opportunities, people have fought to eliminate its implementation, arguing that it unfairly favors certain applicants over others. A 1978 Supreme Court of the United States ruling established that colleges could not implement racial quotas. In 2016, the United States Supreme Court voted 4-3 to uphold the University of Texas at Austin's use of affirmative action in college admissions after candidate Abigail Fisher filed a lawsuit claiming she was unfairly rejected. Okay. So, affirmative action. Affirmative action is essentially the way that the government decided, okay, black people, we've done you guys really dirty for a long, long, long time. Built the country off of your backs on free labor, whipped you, raped your women, separated you guys so that you guys couldn't communicate in your home languages, had people from different tribes, different countries. We're just going to force you guys all to live together as if you're the same, as if you're part of the same group, because you look alike. So whatever, we're going to take away your identity, force you to work under extreme conditions, barely feed you. We're going to do what we can just to make sure that you survive, just so that you can keep working. Went from that to, okay, we're going to take that part out, but we're going to then make everything illegal that black people do, so that way we can essentially continue the slavery system by locking you all up in prison. And the 13th Amendment of the Constitution does abolish slavery, except for if you're in prison. Read it carefully. If you're in prison, you are technically a slave. To Jim Crow, to separate but equal, to the civil rights movement. So this is between 200 and 300 years worth of just being shitted on, right? That's what it was. So affirmative action comes along as a way to say, okay, we've done all this horrible stuff to you. There's no way we can really make it right. We can try to even the playing field a little bit. So people who come from the inner city, whose schools are not as good because property taxes pay for schools, and when you live in an area where a lot of people rent, obviously there's not many property taxes being paid. Therefore, the school's not getting as much money. Therefore, the people who start on a lower economic realm typically stay there because they're not as educated as their counterparts who live in the outskirts of the city. So affirmative action comes in to say, hey, we're going to make it even or we're going to attempt to make it even. And that's where the whole GPA thing came into play. You know, where people would say, oh, well, his grades weren't as good as mine, so how come he got in before me? Because if you look at the curriculum that you guys were learning and the way it was taught, again, another analogy that Kyle likes to say, Kyle Kolinsky from Secular Talk, another analogy that he uses is, let's say you're doing a 100-yard dash. If white people start on the 70-yard line and black people start at the 0-yard line, who do you think is going to win the race? Of course, white people are going to win the race. And that's essentially what we've done in this country, and that's essentially how the education system is set up, district by district. Typically in the more affluent areas, they're receiving better education, so it's easier to get better grades because you're in an area, you're in an environment where you're able to learn. You don't necessarily have to wonder where your next meal's coming from. You don't have to worry about, you know, if the drug dealer up the street is going to get in a shootout. You don't have to worry about gangs. These things don't typically. Drugs, maybe. Drugs exist in the outskirts for sure. Let me take that one back. But the other violent crimes and things of that nature that typically come from living in the inner city, these are things that you don't really have to worry about if you live in the suburbs. So that also adds to your ability to learn. If I'm stressed out and I'm wondering where I'm going to eat and I got to go to work after school to make sure that I can provide because I got to help my mom pay the rent and I'm 14 years old. These are realities of people in the inner city that people in the outskirts don't really ever even think about. When all you have to do is go to cheerleading practice, go home, do your homework, and just be good for mommy or whatever, do your little chores and that type of stuff. Like, if that's all you have to worry about, it's way easier to get a good education and to retain the information that you're learning. So I say all of that to say when the GPA disparity comes in, oh, I have a 3.0, that person has a 2.85. How come they got in before me? Because if you look at all those circumstances that I just laid out there for you, a 2.85 is very good compared to your 3.0. So that's why affirmative action existed and allowed the minority student who had the 2.85 to get in instead of the white person who had the 3.0. Now, a lot of white people feel like this is unfair because they didn't do slavery. True, but you benefit from it. And here's what I mean. I don't mean that you like it. I don't mean that you thought it was a good thing. None of that's probably true. But how you benefit from it is a thing called generational wealth. So when the country was founded, it was founded by white people, obviously, you know, in the present form that the country exists today. It was founded by English settlers, Spanish settlers, you know, whatever, Europeans. What they did was, since they established the country, they were the first people to establish any sort of finances in the country, any sort of, you know, wealth. It was built on the backs of black people, as I mentioned earlier, through slavery, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens is, okay, the very, very first, you know, family who establishes, you know, civilization, essentially, the first families that establish civilization as we know it today in America. They're able to pass down all the stuff that they built to the next generation, okay? So 100 years goes by, that's 2 generations, give or take, of wealth being passed down from family, you know, to family. 200 plus years of that to the present day. Now, black people, when were we first really allowed to even own anything? The 50s, the 60s, that's when black people were first able to. So compared to white people's 200 plus years of being able to pass down generational wealth, compared to that of black people's slightly over 50 years of being able to do so, it's not an even playing field. So if we start at the same place, I bet the results would have been a lot more even, but we didn't start in the same place, and we're still not in the same place. So that's what things like affirmative action try to address. So the Justice Department is trying to eliminate that. Again, Republicans, this is why your party is labeled the racist party. This is why you guys are labeled the bigoted party. I was watching a clip of Adam Carolla, and he was like, oh, just because you're conservative doesn't mean you're racist, and it doesn't mean you're sexist, and that you hate everybody that's not Christian. Maybe. That might be true, you know, but all of the policies, essentially, that are produced by right-wingers, whether that be economics, whether that be freedom of speech related, whether that be separation of church and state related, any of those type of matters, rules against women, the LGBT community, anything like that. Right-wingers always vote or try to put policy in place that damages those communities. So maybe you as a Republican voter may not be a racist yourself, you might not be a sexist yourself, but you also don't care about it enough to want to stand up against it. And that's proven because over and over and over and over and over again, we see where these policies that don't help us meaning minority communities, those are the policies that are continuously pushed for. So if that's the case, how can you say you're not against those communities when literally everything you vote for negatively impacts those communities in one way or another? So this is why you guys are labeled the racists and the bigots and the xenophobes and the sexists. Because of shit like this. The Justice Department may sue colleges over use of affirmative action in admissions. So what happens then? What happens to... And I don't mean the black kids in the inner city who get to go to Cass Tech, because that's a good school. I don't mean the black kids in the inner city that get to go to King, because that's a good school. And these are Detroit schools I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ones who had to go to Kettering,